Love can be dangerous. And tonight you'll find out exactly how dangerous it can be. 6 true stories. 6 first dates that began with hope and ended in absolute terror. Each of these people thought they had found someone special, but discovered something much darker. If you've ever been on a blind date, met someone online, or simply believe in love at first sight, this story will change the way you view relationships forever. Get ready to dive into the darker side of modern dating. And when we're done, you may never trust the same way again. Have you ever felt like you knew someone perfectly through online messaging? Claire felt it too. And that trust almost cost her her life. If you want to know how to recognize the danger signs before it's too late, pay attention to every detail of this first story. It was a rainy October night when Claire finally decided to meet David in person. They'd been chatting for 3 weeks through a dating app. The messages were sweet, affectionate, and full of witty humor. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her beyond the surface. David worked as a financial consultant. He was 32 years old, and his photos showed an attractive, well-groomed man with a warm smile. His conversations stretched into the wee hours. He talked about his dreams of traveling, the books he loved, and how he wanted to find someone special to share his life with. Claire, a 28-year-old nurse, felt like she had finally found someone different. After a series of disastrous relationships, David seemed to represent the stability and maturity she was looking for. When he suggested dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant downtown, she accepted without hesitation. On the night of the date, Claire took special care to dress up. She chose a navy blue dress that accentuated her eyes, applied subtle makeup, and spritzed on her favorite perfume. She felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation she hadn't experienced in months. La Bella Notte restaurant was located on a busy downtown street, known for its authentic Italian style and romantic ambience. When Claire arrived at 7:30 p.m. sharp, she found David waiting outside, beneath the flickering light of an old street lamp. He looked exactly as he did in the photos, tall, with neatly combed dark hair, and a casual blazer over a crisp white shirt. "Claire!" he exclaimed, leaning closer with a radiant smile. "You look even more beautiful in person." His hug was warm, but it lasted a few seconds longer than was comfortable. She chalked it up to the natural nervousness of a first date. Dinner was magical. David was a natural conversationalist, asking intelligent questions about her work at the hospital and showing genuine interest in her stories. He talked about his business trips, always with amusing anecdotes that made her laugh. They shared a bottle of Chianti, and when he reached across the table to touch her hand, Claire felt a shiver of excitement. "You have amazing eyes," he said softly, fixing her gaze with an intense yet romantic look. "I bet you've heard that 1,000 times." Over dessert, he asked about her routine, her work schedule, and when she got home. Claire, relaxed by the wine and the pleasant company, answered in detail. He seemed fascinated by every detail of her daily life. By the time they left the restaurant, it was past midnight. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets bright with streetlights. The streets were deserted, except for the distant echo of music coming from a few bars still open. Claire had parked 3 blocks away, on a less busy side street. "Let me walk you to your car," David insisted, taking her hand. "It's not safe for a beautiful woman to be walking alone at this hour." They walked in silence for a few blocks, but Claire noticed that David seemed different. He was more tense, constantly looking around, as if searching for something or someone. When she mentioned the weather, he gave short, distracted answers. 2 blocks before they reached the car, David stopped abruptly. "You know," he said, his voice sounding strange, deeper. "I almost didn't come tonight." "Why?" Claire asked, trying to keep her tone light, though something in her tone made her wary. David turned to her, and in the dim streetlight, his eyes looked different. Colder. More calculating. "Because I knew that if I came, I wouldn't be able to let you go." Claire tried to laugh it off, thinking it was an awkward attempt at flirting. "Well, it was a wonderful night, but you don't understand." he interrupted, stepping closer. His smile had completely disappeared. I parked my van behind the building. It's warmer in there. We could talk more, away from prying eyes. Claire's heart began to race. Something was very wrong. The way he talked about the van, the change in his posture, the intensity in his eyes, it all screamed danger. Actually, I'm pretty tired, she said, trying to sound casual as she quickened her pace. It was a beautiful night, but I need to get home. David continued walking beside her, keeping the same pace, but now in absolute silence. The only sound was his footsteps echoing on the empty street. Claire felt the weight of his gaze fixed on her, like a predator studying its prey. When they finally spotted the parking lot where she'd left her car, Claire felt a momentary sense of relief. But the place was dimly lit, with only one working orange bulb, casting long, ominous shadows between the few scattered cars. She quickened her pace, searching for her keys in her purse, when she felt David's heavy hand land on her shoulder. "Claire," he whispered, his breath hot in her ear. "Don't make this hard on both of us." Panic gripped her completely. Without thinking, her trembling hands reached for the car alarm's panic button. The shrill sound cut through the silent night like a siren, echoing between the emptied buildings. David instinctively recoiled, covering his ears, and in that moment of distraction, Claire managed to open the car door, threw herself inside, and locked all the doors in a desperate movement. Through the rain-fogged glass, she saw David standing in the middle of the parking lot, completely still. He didn't run. He didn't scream. He just stood there, watching her with that cold smile as she started the car, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Even as she backed out of the parking lot, David remained in the same position. In the rearview mirror, Claire could see his dark silhouette against the streetlight, like an ominous statue. He didn't move until she turned the corner and disappeared into the night. Claire drove straight home, constantly checking her rearview mirror, expecting to see the headlights of David's van appear behind her. She arrived at her apartment in shock, locked all the doors and windows, and stayed awake all night with the lights on. David never messaged again. His profile on the app disappeared the next day, as if it had never existed. Claire tried to report the incident to the police, but without evidence of a crime being committed, there was little they could do. 2 weeks later, while watching the morning news before work, Claire nearly dropped her coffee cup. David's photo appeared on the screen, but with a different name, Michael Torres, 34, arrested in another state for attempted kidnapping and murder. The reporter explained that he used fake profiles on dating apps to lure young women. 3 victims had been found. A 4th had managed to escape and identified him. Claire realized that, by a few seconds and a panic button, she avoided becoming the 5th victim. This story teaches us that intuition can save lives. If you're meeting someone online, always meet in public places, tell friends about your plans, and never ignore that feeling that something isn't right. Claire is alive today because she trusted her instincts when it mattered most. What if the most dangerous place on a first date wasn't a dark street, but the apartment of the person you're meeting? This next story will show why we should never ignore warning signs, even when they seem like small, unimportant details. Jason worked as a software engineer at a tech company, leading a quiet and organized life. At 30, she rarely stepped outside her comfort zone when it came to relationships. She preferred meeting people through mutual friends or professional settings. Blind dates were definitely not her style. It was his coworker, Sandra, who urged him to meet Marissa. "She's perfect for you." When she suggested he come over for drinks before dinner, he found the proposal practical and welcoming. "I can make those cocktails you mentioned you like," she wrote. "And I have a vinyl collection I think you'll love. Then we can decide where to go for dinner." On the appointed Friday, Jason arrived at Marissa's building at 7 p.m. It was an old, well-kept brick building with a charming facade reminiscent of 1920s architecture. The doorman greeted him politely and directed him to the elevator. The apartment was on the 6th floor, the top floor of the building. When Jason knocked on the door, he heard the sound of several locks being opened, not just one or two, but at least 5 distinct metallic clicks. The door swung open, revealing Marissa, who was even more beautiful in person than in the photos he'd sent. "Jason!" she exclaimed, giving him a warm hug. Come in, come in!" But as he crossed the threshold, he couldn't help but notice the impressive security apparatus. In addition to the multiple locks he'd heard, 3 padlocks, a chain, a deadbolt, there was also a sliding iron bar on the inside of the door. "Gee," he commented, trying to sound casual. "Is this a dangerous neighborhood?" Marissa closed the door behind him, meticulously replacing each of the locks. "You could say that," she replied, but there was something in her tone that didn't sound entirely convincing. The apartment itself was cozy and well decorated. Soft lights, candles scattered on the tables, and an old record player playing soft jazz in the corner. Marissa had made gin and tonics, and they settled into the couch, chatting about work, movies, and music. It was exactly the kind of quiet evening Jason enjoyed. But as the night wore on, he began to notice strange little details. Marissa would frequently glance at the door, not in the casual way of checking if it was locked, but as if she were listening for something. Her eyes would remain fixed on the entrance for long seconds, and she would stop speaking mid-sentence. When Jason got up to go to the bathroom, he passed the wall near the front door. That's when he saw the marks. Deep scratches in the wood, near the hinges. They weren't pet marks. They were long, jagged, as if something or someone had tried to force their way in, scratching desperately. When he returned from the bathroom, he found Marissa in the kitchen, making more drinks. She was closer now, smiling more brightly. "You know," she said, leaning in closer, "you're exactly my type." There was something about the way she said it that made the hairs on the back of Jason's neck stand up. It was predatory, possessive. "Well," he replied, trying to keep it light, "how about we go to that restaurant you mentioned? I'm getting hungry." Marissa's smile faded slightly. "Actually, I'd prefer you stayed here. It's safer." Before Jason could respond, they heard a sound coming from the hallway. A slow, deliberate shuffling, as if someone were walking with difficulty. The sound stopped right in front of Marissa's apartment door. Jason froze. Marissa went completely pale, putting her finger to her lips in an urgent gesture of silence. "Don't say a word," she whispered, and for the first time that night, her fear seemed genuine. The doorknob began to turn slowly. The chain jangled. Then came the sound Jason would never forget, heavy, deliberate breathing from the other side of the door. It wasn't the kind of breathing someone had just climbed stairs or was in a hurry. It was controlled, as if the person was savoring the moment. Jason whispered, "Let's call the police." But Marissa shook her head violently, her eyes wide with terror. They stood there, frozen, their breathing still. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the sound stopped. Footsteps receded down the hallway, slowly descending the stairs. Marissa let out a deep breath and, surprisingly, smiled again. But this time, it was a different smile, tense, knowing. "You're lucky," she said softly, moving closer to him again. "Most of my dates never last past the first night." Jason felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Something about the way she said it, the sinister implication behind her words, made him realize he needed to get out of there immediately. "Actually," he said, checking the time on his phone, "I just remembered I have a really early meeting tomorrow. I need to go home and rest." Marissa watched him for a long moment, studying his expression. "Are you sure? The night is still young." "Yes, I do. It was wonderful meeting you in person." Jason headed for the door, waiting while she undid each of the security locks. The process took almost 2 minutes. "Be careful out there," she said when he was finally able to leave. "You never know who might be waiting." Jason quickly descended the stairs, his heart still racing. On the ground floor, he greeted the doorman and stepped out onto the street. Only when he was inside his car, with the doors locked, did he allow himself to fully process what had happened. For the next few weeks, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Especially at night, when he came home, he felt like someone was standing on the other side of his door, just breathing. He never spoke to Marissa again, ignored her increasingly persistent messages, and asked Sandra not to mention his name again. When she asked why, Jason simply said they weren't compatible. But some nights, as he lay in bed, he would hear sounds in the hallway of his building. Slow footsteps, pausing in front of his door. And then, that controlled, deliberate breathing that made him wonder if the danger was behind him, or if it had followed him home. This story reminds us that our safety is more important than social graces. If something feels wrong, if you feel afraid without being able to explain why, trust those instincts. Jason was lucky to get out when he did. Not everyone has that same opportunity. What would you do if you arrived on a first date and discovered you were the only customers in the entire restaurant? This next story will show that sometimes, danger comes disguised as romance. If you've ever set up dates in places you're unfamiliar with, this story will make you completely rethink that strategy. Erin was a 26-year-old high school teacher who led a disciplined and careful life. She rarely went out at night, preferring daytime dates, and always confiding in her friends about her commitments. Her experiences with dating apps had been disappointing: men who lied about their age and profession, or simply disappeared after a few conversations. Kyle seemed different. His messages were intelligent, well-written, and he demonstrated genuine knowledge of topics that interested Erin, especially classic cinema and Gothic literature. When they discovered they both loved 70s horror films, they spent 2 weeks discussing film analysis through long, elaborate messages. He claimed to work as an architect, traveled frequently for business, and lived in a nearby city. His photos showed an attractive man in his 30s, always well-dressed, with a confident smile. When he suggested dinner at a special place he knew, Erin enthusiastically accepted. "It's a small Italian restaurant," he wrote, "off the tourist trail, but the food is authentic and the atmosphere is perfect for conversation without distractions. It's about 20 minutes from downtown, but it's worth the trip." Kyle sent the address and offered to pick her up, but Erin preferred to drive herself. It was a personal rule on first dates. He set it up for 8 p.m. on a Friday, promising it would be an unforgettable night. The Villa Rosa restaurant was tucked away on a back road, surrounded by trees and far from the city lights. When Erin arrived a few minutes late due to difficulty finding the place, the parking lot had only 2 cars, hers and presumably Kyle's. The establishment was small, with a rustic stone facade and red-curtained windows. It seemed charming, but there was something unsettling about the absolute stillness of the place. No sound came from inside, no conversation, no music, none of the typical noise of a busy restaurant. When Erin pushed open the front door, she found Kyle already seated at a table in the center of the room. He stood to greet her with a wide smile, wearing an impeccable dark suit. "Erin, you look beautiful tonight." But it was what she saw around her that made her uneasy. The restaurant was completely empty. There were no other customers, no sound from the kitchen, just a lone waiter at the back of the room, polishing glasses without looking at them. "Where is everyone?" Erin asked, trying to sound casual as Kyle pulled out her chair for her. "I saved the place for us," he replied, his eyes shining with an intensity she hadn't noticed in the photos. "I thought it would be more intimate." Erin sat down, but her discomfort grew. Booking an entire restaurant for a first date was too grand a gesture, almost possessive. And the silence was oppressive, even the kitchen seemed inactive. Kyle ordered a bottle of red wine without consulting her, speaking to the waiter in an authoritative tone that contrasted with the gentle demeanor he displayed in his messages. The waiter, a nervous-looking middle-aged man, just nodded and quickly left. For the first 15 minutes, Kyle was the charming conversationalist Erin had hoped for. He talked about architecture, asked about her schoolwork, and made intelligent comments about the movies they'd discussed online. But his eyes never left her face, never blinked, as if he were memorizing every detail. "I have something to confess," Kyle said, leaning forward and lowering his voice. "I've been watching you for some time now." Aaron laughed nervously. "You mean, since we started chatting online?" "No," he replied, and his smile grew wider. "Long before that." Before she could fully process what he'd said, the kitchen door burst open. A man in a dirty apron appeared, his eyes wide with fear, and whispered something urgent to the waiter. Aaron couldn't hear the words, but she saw the waiter shake his head discreetly, as if denying some request. "Excuse me," Aaron said, standing up. "I need to go to the bathroom." Kyle smiled, but there was something predatory in his expression. "Of course. But don't take too long. Some doors around here aren't meant to be opened." Aaron followed the signs down the narrow hallway. The women's restroom was at the end, but when she passed the emergency exit door, she noticed it was padlocked from the inside. Her stomach tightened. Why would anyone lock an emergency exit from the inside? Near the bathroom, a door was ajar. From inside came a low, rhythmic sound, heavy breathing, as if someone were sleeping or waiting. Aaron approached cautiously and, through a crack in the door, saw what appeared to be a small storage room, but there was something on the floor. Something large, covered by a tarp. Footsteps approached behind her. Kyle's voice, low and controlled. "Find anything interesting, Aaron?" She turned quickly, forcing a smile. "I was just looking for the bathroom." Kyle watched her for a long moment, then pointed to the correct door. "It's there. Don't get lost." When Aaron entered the bathroom, her hands were shaking. She tried to call the police, but there was no cell phone signal. Panic began to grip her. Something was very, very wrong. When she came out, Kyle was standing in the hallway, waiting. "Everything okay?" he asked, but there was no genuine concern in his voice. "Actually," Aaron said, trying to remain calm, "I'm not feeling very well. I think I should go." "Too bad," Kyle replied, subtly blocking the way back to the main hall. "The night has barely begun." Aaron felt panic intensify. "Please, I need to get to my car." It was then that she heard a different voice. The waiter had appeared at the end of the hallway. "Go," he said in a husky voice, looking directly at her. "Go now." Aaron needed no further encouragement. She pushed Kyle aside and ran down the hallway, across the empty living room in seconds, and burst through the front door. Her hands were shaking so badly that it took her a while to unlock the car, but she finally managed to get in and start the engine. In the rearview mirror, she saw Kyle standing at the entrance to the restaurant, calmly watching her pull out of the parking lot. He didn't chase after her, didn't yell, he just stood there, with that unsettling smile, as if he knew something she didn't. Aaron drove straight to the nearest police station. When they returned with the officers 2 hours later, the restaurant was dark and apparently closed. The sign on the door read, "Closed for renovations." There was no sign of Kyle, the nervous waiter, or the man in the apron. The officers asked a few questions, but with no evidence of foul play, there was little they could do. Aaron provided all the information she had about Kyle, but when they tried to track his profile on the app, he had disappeared. Even more disturbing, when Aaron tried to find information about the Villa Rosa restaurant online, she found nothing. No website, no reviews, no business registration. As if the place simply didn't exist. Over the next few weeks, Aaron had recurring nightmares about that room with something covered by a tarp. She changed all her online profiles, altered her routine, and never went on dates again without telling several people exactly where she would be. 6 months later, reading local news, she came across an article about the disappearance of 3 young women in the area. All had last been seen on dates arranged through dating apps. The investigation led nowhere, but Aaron knew, with a cold certainty in her stomach, that she had escaped a fate far worse than one unpleasant night. This story teaches us the importance of always checking out where we're going to meet, telling friends about our specific plans, and never ignoring when a situation seems staged or overly controlled. Erin survived because she trusted her intuition and was fortunate enough to find someone willing to help her at the right time. How many times have you gotten into a taxi without questioning where the driver was actually taking you? This story will forever change the way you view public transportation. If you've ever blindly trusted strangers to take you somewhere, especially at night, this story will be a crucial wake-up call for your safety. Megan worked as a freelance journalist in a big city, often staying late for events and interviews. At 24, she was used to fending for herself, using public transportation, and relying on her ability to quickly assess situations. She was independent by necessity and proud of her self-confidence. Through a dating app, she met Josh, a 29-year-old personal trainer who seemed genuinely interesting. Their conversations were fun, he shared music playlists she loved, and his photos showed someone in good physical shape, with a warm smile and expressive eyes. Josh worked flexible hours, often training clients mornings and evenings, which perfectly suited Megan's irregular schedule. They talked for 3 weeks before scheduling an in-person meeting, building a connection that felt natural and comfortable. "How about we meet for coffee downtown?" he suggested. "I know a cozy place near the financial district. Afterwards, if we're getting along well, we can have dinner somewhere nice." Megan readily agreed. The plan seemed casual and safe, a public coffee date in the late afternoon, with the option to extend the date if they found chemistry. The date started perfectly. Josh was even more attractive in person, with an infectious energy and a sense of humor that made her laugh constantly. The cafe he chose was truly charming, a small establishment with vintage decor and exceptionally good coffee. They chatted for 2 hours, discovering similar musical tastes, funny travel stories, and an intellectual connection Megan rarely found. Josh talked about his passion for helping people achieve their fitness goals, and she shared her experiences covering important stories as a journalist. As the sun began to set, Josh suggested they continue the evening. "I know an amazing restaurant about 20 minutes away. Fantastic Asian food, perfect atmosphere for us to talk more." Megan hesitated only for a second. It was a change of plans, and she wasn't familiar with this part of town after dark. But Josh had been a perfect gentleman so far, and she was genuinely enjoying herself. "Okay," she agreed. "But my car is in the parking lot near my apartment. How do we get there?" Josh waved to the street. "No problem, we'll take a taxi. It's more relaxing, we can continue talking without worrying about traffic." He flagged down a passing taxi, and they climbed into the back. The driver was a middle-aged man with a weather-beaten face who greeted Josh with a familiar wave. Megan noticed but didn't care. Perhaps Josh regularly used taxis in that area. The first 10 minutes of the ride went smoothly. Josh continued to be entertaining, pointing out interesting spots around the city as they passed, keeping the conversation light. But as they began to move away from the busy downtown areas and onto darker residential streets, Megan began to feel slightly uneasy. "Are you sure this is the way?" she asked, looking out the window at streets she didn't recognize. "Trust me," Josh replied, his hand lightly touching her knee. "It's a shortcut that will save us 10 minutes. The driver knows all the alternative routes." Then the taxi took an unexpected turn, turning onto a less well-lit road with dense trees on both sides. Megan felt the first real thrill of alarm. They were heading away from the city, not toward another neighborhood. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice betraying slight anxiety. Josh turned to her, and for the first time that night, his smile looked different, wider, but not quite reaching his eyes. "You know, Megan, I like to know who I can trust." His tone of voice had changed subtly. Lower, more controlled. Megan glanced at the driver in the rearview mirror and saw his eyes watching her back. It wasn't the casual glance of a driver checking out passengers. It was intense, expectant. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to remain calm, but her heart began to race. Josh leaned closer to her, and she noticed a dark backpack at his feet that she hadn't noticed when they'd gotten into the taxi. The backpack was slightly open, revealing something glistening inside, Metal, maybe tools, or... It's just a little test, Josh whispered, his breath too hot against her ear. You pass, or you don't. Panic exploded in Megan's chest. She tried to open the door, but it was locked. The click of the electronic lock echoed in the tense silence of the car. The driver accelerated, and through the windows, she saw only darkness and trees rushing by. Josh, stop it, she said, trying to sound firm, but her voice was shaky. I don't know what kind of joke this is, but I want to go down now. We haven't reached our destination yet. The driver spoke for the first time, his voice rough and amused. Josh chuckled softly, a sound unlike the hearty laughter she'd heard all day. Megan began searching desperately for some form of escape. Her cell phone was in her purse, but even if she could call someone, she had no idea where they were. The windows weren't the kind that rolled down all the way, and the taxi was moving too fast for her to consider jumping. That's when he saw a light ahead, what looked like a gas station. His only chance. Without thinking, Megan screamed as loud as she could, "Help! Help me!" and began banging on the window with her fists, hoping someone at the gas station could see her. Josh tried to hold her back, but she continued to scream and struggle. The driver cursed, and the car began to slow down. Apparently the last thing they wanted was to attract attention. "Stop this car now!" Megan screamed, digging her nails into Josh's arm as he tried to cover her mouth. The taxi stopped abruptly near the gas station. Perhaps they realized she would be making too much noise, or that someone might see the commotion. The driver unlocked the doors with an irritated click. Megan didn't wait for a second chance. She threw open the door and ran barefoot. Her sandals had been left behind in the struggle, straight into the gas station lights. Behind her, she heard Josh shouting her name, but she didn't stop to look. Inside the gas station, panting and in tears, she told the night shift attendant what had happened. He immediately called the police and let her use the phone to call a friend. When the police arrived 20 minutes later, the taxi was long gone. Megan gave them all the information she could remember: Josh's appearance, the driver's description, the approximate make and model of the car, but she never heard if they were able to find them. Josh's profile on the app disappeared the next day. Megan discovered that all the information he had shared, his workplace, personal history, even his full name, was either false or unverifiable. She never again got into a taxi without writing down the license plate and sending a photo to a friend. He never again accepted sudden changes in plans on dates. And every time she sees a car slowing down near her at night, her heart still races, remembering that ride that almost ended very differently. This story teaches us that we should always be alert when our plans change unexpectedly, especially when they involve going to unfamiliar places with people we're still getting to know. Megan survived because she didn't hesitate to make a fuss when she sensed danger, even at the risk of overreacting. Sometimes, appearing paranoid can save your life. What if you discovered that the person you're meeting doesn't live alone, but that there's someone upstairs they've never mentioned? This story will show that some secrets are kept for very dark reasons. If you've ever been to the apartment of someone you met online, this story will make you question what we really know about the people we invite into our lives. Lena was a freelance graphic designer, a 27-year-old creative professional who worked primarily from home. Her solitary routine led her to dating apps as a way to meet new people, as she spent most of her days alone in her home studio. Mark appeared on her feed with a profile that immediately caught her eye. He was a 31-year-old professional photographer with an impressive portfolio of artistic portraits and urban landscapes. His personal photos showed an attractive, well-dressed man, always in interesting locations: art galleries, conceptual cafes, cultural events. Their conversations flowed naturally for weeks. Mark demonstrated a deep knowledge of art and design, asked insightful questions about Lena's work, and shared fascinating stories about his photoshoots with various clients. He seemed to fully understand the creative challenges she faced. "It would be amazing to show you my studio," Mark wrote after a month of conversations. I have a few projects in the works that I think you'd love to see. And I'm curious to hear your professional opinion on some of the pieces I'm working on. When he invited Lena to his apartment for a casual evening, pizza, wine, and lots of art talk, she accepted without hesitation. It was exactly the kind of intellectual and creative encounter she was looking for, far from the noisy bars and conventional restaurants she so detested. Mark lived in a bohemian area of the city, known for its artist studios and converted lofts. The address he gave was in a converted industrial building, the kind of place Lena had always admired but never dared consider due to the high rents. On the appointed Saturday night, Lena arrived at Mark's building at 7 p.m. The building was impressive, exposed brick, tall windows, and a modern entrance that retained its original industrial charm. Mark greeted her on the ground floor, hugged her warmly, and guided her to the elevator. "My place is on the 3rd floor," he explained as they went upstairs. "It's a duplex. Downstairs is the living area and my makeshift studio, and upstairs is a small room I use for storage and sometimes as a darkroom for analog film development." The apartment was exactly what Lena had hoped for, spacious, filled with natural light even at dusk, with walls covered in artistic photographs and carefully organized professional equipment. It was the kind of creative environment she'd always dreamed of. Mark had prepared a simple but elegant dinner. They ate artisanal pizza accompanied by an excellent red wine, while he showed off his recent work. Lena was impressed by the technical and artistic quality of the photographs, especially a series of black and white portraits that captured deeply emotional expressions. "Your models are incredible," Lena commented, examining a particularly striking photo of a young woman with intense eyes and a melancholic expression. "How do you get them to express so much feeling?" Mark smiled, but there was something odd about his expression. "Well, let's just say I have specific methods for capturing authenticity." As the night wore on, Lena noticed Mark frequently looking up at the ceiling, as if listening to something upstairs. When she asked about the occasional echoing footsteps, he laughed and said it was just the building's old heater. Around 10 p.m., while Mark was in the kitchen making coffee, Lena clearly heard the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps coming from upstairs. It wasn't random noises from pipes or heating, it was human footsteps, pacing back and forth, as if someone were making rounds. "Mark," she called. "Are you sure it's just a warm-up? It sounds like someone's walking up there." He returned from the kitchen with 2 cups, his smile a little tighter. "Oh, that? Sometimes the building makes strange noises. Old construction, you know." But the footsteps continued, more pronounced now, as if whoever was upstairs knew there was a visitor and was deliberately making noise. Lena felt uneasy, especially since Mark seemed to be completely ignoring the sounds. Then, unexpectedly, there was a loud banging on the ceiling, followed by a sound that made Lena's blood run cold, a muffled moan, as if someone were trying to scream with their mouth covered. "What was that?" Lena stood up abruptly, her heart racing. Mark watched her for a long moment, his face completely losing the warm expression it had held all night. "You shouldn't have heard that," he said quietly. "Mark, what's going on upstairs?" Lena demanded, walking towards the stairs that led to the upper floor. "I wouldn't go up there if I were you," Mark said, his voice completely different now, cool, controlled. "Some people don't like being interrupted." Lena stopped at the foot of the stairs, her instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong. The footsteps upstairs stopped abruptly, as if whoever was there was also listening to their conversation. "Who's up there, Mark?" "Just work," he replied, approaching her slowly. "You understand how it is, right? Sometimes art demands total dedication." It was then that Lena noticed something she had missed before. One of the photographs on the wall showed the same young woman from several other shots, but in this particular one, she didn't appear to be posing willingly. Her eyes showed genuine fear, and there was something around her wrist that looked like a rope. "I need to go," Lena said, heading quickly for the door. Mark didn't try to physically stop her, but his voice followed her. "Too bad. I'd really like to show you my complete work, especially the more unique pieces. Lena practically ran out of the apartment, not waiting for the elevator, but running down the stairs as quickly as possible. Only when she was outside, inside her car with the doors locked, did she allow herself to fully process what had happened. On the way home, he called the police from his cell phone, reporting the strange situation and the sounds he had heard. The officers said they would investigate, but without concrete evidence of foul play, there was little they could do immediately. 3 days later, Lena received a call from the police. When they went to Mark's apartment to conduct a welfare check, they found the place completely empty. There was no furniture, no camera equipment, and no sign that anyone had lived there recently. Even more disturbing, the landlord said the apartment had been vacant for 6 months, and that no one named Mark had rented the space. The photographs Lena described were never found. Mark's dating app profile disappeared, and the questions about who was upstairs that night remained unanswered. Lena changed all her online habits, became much more cautious about dating, and never again accepted invitations to the apartment of anyone she recently met. But on quiet nights, when she's working alone in her studio, she sometimes hears footsteps in the apartment above, making her wonder if some secrets follow us home. This story reminds us that we should always verify the veracity of information people share with us, especially when something seems too good to be true. Lena was fortunate to trust her instincts when things didn't add up with the explanations she received. Questioning inconsistencies can save lives. What would you do if you discovered that someone you met online knew exactly where you were at all hours of the day? This latest story shows that digital danger can become a very real threat. If you've ever shared personal details with someone you met online, this final story will make you completely rethink your online privacy. Sophie worked as an accountant at a mid-sized company, leading an organized and predictable life. At 25, she shared an apartment with a college roommate on the 4th floor of a residential building in a safe area of the city. She rarely went out alone at night, preferred familiar surroundings, and always kept friends informed of her whereabouts. Her meeting with Ethan through a dating app started promisingly. He worked in technology, claimed to be a cybersecurity expert, and demonstrated impressive knowledge on a wide range of topics. His messages were well written and respectful, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her beyond superficial appearances. During the first 2 weeks of their conversation, Ethan was the perfect example of a thoughtful suitor. He sent good morning and good night messages, asked about her work, and remembered small details she mentioned in previous conversations. Sophie felt special, as if she'd finally found someone who truly listened to her. They arranged a first meeting at a cafe near Sophie's office during their lunch break. She chose the location and time, following her own safety rules for first dates. Ethan agreed immediately, demonstrating flexibility and understanding that positively impressed her. The date went better than Sophie expected. Ethan was attractive, well-dressed, and easily chatted about work, hobbies, and future goals. He asked interesting questions about her profession, demonstrated knowledge of corporate finance, and suggested a second date before they'd even finished their coffee. "I'd love to take you out to dinner somewhere special," he said as they parted. "Let me plan something truly memorable for you." Sophie nodded, feeling confident about her first impressions. Ethan seemed like exactly the kind of stable, caring man she was looking for. After their second date, an elegant dinner followed by a leisurely stroll through the historic city center, Ethan's messages became more frequent. At first, Sophie thought it was sweet. He'd text her during her work breaks, asking how her day was, sending funny photos, or interesting articles he thought she'd enjoy reading. Gradually, however, the frequency increased. The messages arrived every hour, then every half hour, then at even shorter intervals. Sophie began to feel a little suffocated, but she didn't want to seem rude to someone who was clearly interested in her. One Wednesday night, Sophie decided to do a digital detox. She put her phone on silent and focused on reading a book she'd bought weeks earlier. It was a quiet night at home. Her roommate was out with friends, and Sophie just wanted to relax without distractions. Around midnight, when she finally checked her phone, she found 23 unread messages from Ethan. The first few were normal, asking about her day, sharing a joke. But as the hours passed and she didn't respond, the tone changed dramatically. "Why aren't you responding? I know you're seeing my messages. I don't like it when people ignore me, Sophie. You're trying my patience." The last message, sent just 5 minutes earlier, made her blood run cold. "I can see you're awake. Your bedroom light is on." Sophie ran to the bedroom window, which overlooked the street. Down below, across the avenue, a silhouette stood beneath a streetlight. The distance was great, but the posture and height seemed consistent with Ethan. The figure didn't move, just stared at the building. With shaking hands, Sophie turned on the lights in other rooms and closed all the curtains. Her phone vibrated again. "There's no point in hiding. I know exactly where you are." Sophie tried calling her roommate, but it went straight to voicemail. She was probably at a loud party or club. She considered calling the police, but what would she say? That someone was standing on the street? That she was receiving intrusive messages from a man she had voluntarily gone out with? The messages kept coming. "Apartment 4B, isn't it? You look beautiful when you're nervous. Open the window, Sophie. I want to wave to you." Panic gripped her completely. How did he know the apartment number? Sophie was sure he'd never mentioned that specific detail. And the reference to her being nervous suggested he could see her somehow, even with the curtains closed. Sophie locked herself in the bathroom, the only room without windows, and called her older brother, who lived 15 minutes away. Through tears and whispers, she explained the situation. He promised to come immediately, and suggested she call the police while she waited. When she finally summoned the courage to call 911, the messages stopped abruptly. Sophie waited in the bathroom for 40 minutes until her brother arrived, accompanied by 2 friends. When they finally went outside to check the street, there was no one there. Police arrived an hour later, listened to Sophie's account, and patrolled the block. They found nothing suspicious, but one of the officers suggested she document all messages and consider a restraining order if the behavior continued. Sophie didn't hear from Ethan for 3 days. She began to think that maybe she'd overreacted, that maybe he just had a bad night, or had too much to drink. Then, early Saturday morning, she woke to her phone vibrating incessantly on her nightstand. It wasn't a text message this time. It was a photo. The image showed Sophie sleeping, taken from inside her bedroom, just a few feet from her bed. The angle suggested the subject had been standing near her dresser, watching her sleep long enough to choose the best moment for the photograph. Sophie screamed, waking her roommate, who immediately called the police. This time, they took the case more seriously. The photo was clear evidence of trespassing and predatory behavior. But when they tried to track Ethan through Sophie's information, phone number, app profile, and listed workplace, they discovered it was all fake. The number belonged to a prepaid cell phone purchased with cash. The profile had disappeared. The company he claimed to work for had never had an employee with that name. Sophie and her roommate moved later that week, keeping their new address private, and Sophie changed her phone number. She installed additional locks and security cameras, and never went to sleep again without double-checking that all the windows were locked. Months later, when Sophie finally felt safe enough to try dating again, she found a note under her windshield wiper in the work parking lot. "I like your new apartment. See you soon." She never discovered how he managed to find her again, or how much time he spent observing her new routine. Sophie moved again, this time to another state, and still obsessively checks for follow-up every time she leaves the house. This final story reminds us that sharing personal information online can have consequences far beyond the digital world. Sophie learned in the most terrifying way possible that modern stalkers use technology in ways that make it nearly impossible to completely escape their surveillance. Privacy isn't paranoia, it's a matter of survival. 6 stories. 6 encounters that began with hope and ended in terror. Claire, Jason, Aaron, Megan, Lena, and Sophie, all ordinary people, searching for love, companionship, human connection. And all of them nearly paid with their lives for this universal quest. These aren't scare stories, they're life-saving warnings. In each of them, the victim survived because, at some crucial moment, they decided to trust their instincts instead of their social graces. They chose to appear rude or paranoid, instead of polite and confident. The modern world of dating has changed. Apps have made it easier to connect, but they've also made it easier for predators to find victims. The next person you meet online could be the love of your life, or they could be someone who turns your life into a nightmare. If you take only one lesson from these stories, let it be this: your safety is worth more than any stranger's opinion. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone pressures you into doing something that makes you uncomfortable, that's a giant red flag waving right in front of you. Always meet new people in public places. Always tell your friends where you're going and who you're with. Always trust your intuition, even when it seems irrational. And remember, there's no love at first sight so strong that it's worth risking your life. If this story saved even one person from a dangerous situation, it was worth every minute you spent listening. Share these stories, spread these warnings, because somewhere, right now, someone is about to meet an internet stranger, and you might need to hear just that. Take care of yourself. Trust your instincts. And remember, true love should never be accompanied by fear.